Hey everyone, this is Julian Torres here with Behind Company Lines. Today we're interviewing Vinay, co-founder and CEO of Process Street. Process Street is a AI-powered process platform. Vinay, I'm so excited to chat with you and get to know more about you, share your story with the audience, but also really get into the weeds of processes and this whole kind of ecosystem around workflows that I think a lot of companies don't really see the pain of it until it becomes a problem, and that oftentimes comes with scaling and really just a lot of foundational changes or along the way that they can kind of improve their overall structure of how they're doing things and documenting. And we'll get into all that as I'm extremely excited to see how you kind of created this ecosystem around creating really efficient workflows for companies. But before we get into all that, what were you doing before you started the company?
Well, great to meet you, Julian. Excited to be here. So originally I'm from Australia, and my story is, I guess, a little bit interesting, but I left Australia when I was 24 and basically went backpacking. I read the 4-Hour Work Week and I was like, I want to do that. And I saved up enough money to basically go traveling for a year. And at the same time launched my first company, which was like an e-commerce store. I literally just like followed the playbook. And kind of things went from there. And I continued to launch businesses and continued to make more money and extended that like 1-year trip into 10 years, basically. So right before Process Street, I was running a marketing company, basically an SEO company, where we were running a bunch of like a whole portfolio of websites, doing a bunch of content marketing. And that was the business that kind of sparked the idea for Process Street. So it was a remote team. I've been running remote teams since 2009. I had employees all across the world, big teams in India and the Philippines. And we were just looking for a platform to help run that business and keep everyone on track. And so that kind of sparked the idea for Process Street.
What was the incumbent before that? I mean, what were you looking into and considering implementing before you had to kind of solve the problem yourself?
Yeah. So we're doing a lot of stuff on spreadsheets and docs. We were testing project management tools. And the way that you could think about Process Street is it's something like Notion or Monday, but for process and compliance driven teams. So it kind of has like a builder user model versus like a collaborator model where everybody's a collaborator on the platform. And the builders define these very structured processes where you can get into the very details. Like you must upload a PDF file here. And if you don't, if it's not a PDF file, like it's going to fail, right? And you can create these very, very like tight, like workflows and processes that don't allow the users to kind of go off the rails in any way. So this becomes really valuable for compliance-driven teams where there's like regulation that you're dealing with or health and safety that you're dealing with, or just like very like repetitive processes where you've already figured out what to do and you just want people to follow that process versus like the collaboration platforms where everybody's coming in and adding tasks and doing stuff and moving stuff around or like a spreadsheet or something, right? Where you get like a lot of freedom to do different things, which can be great for certain teams that are more like creative project-based teams. But again, we focus on those process-driven teams.
And those process-driven teams, can you define a couple of use cases just for the audience to get some context?
Yeah. So like our top use cases are HR, finance, and IT. So they tend to be the kind of back office process and compliance-driven teams. So employee onboarding, financial reporting, anything around like payment approvals or processing. Yeah. And then there's like certain industries that are very process driven as well. For example, real estate's a big industry for us.
It's fascinating to think about how processes are built, especially at larger companies. And are they also using spreadsheets? There's a bunch of onboarding tools, but it kind of cuts off at some point. And then there's kind of this gap in knowledge that I feel like a lot of employees have to learn, whether it's during the onboarding process or whether they're doing some maybe auxiliary task that's not a main function of their position, but need the information, need to know. What were companies documenting and putting that information at for employees to find it previously?
Yeah. So like in the enterprise, the biggest product is Microsoft SharePoint. And it's like a very old like dinosaur of a product, but does $10 billion in revenue or some crazy number. And the big problem with SharePoint though, is that it's not no code. So it requires like an engineering team or like a SharePoint team where there's basically SharePoint developers and you got to go and get your SharePoint developer certification and you need to have a background in like software engineering. And so these big companies have these like teams that basically manage SharePoint and build out these workflows and processes and all the integrations. And it does the job, right, when you get it built, but it's an extremely heavy lift and a very poor user experience. And so the HR team can't touch it, right? Like if the HR team wants to make a change to the SharePoint workflow, they've got to go like submit a request to the SharePoint team. Usually they have a backlog of like 6 months. So they've got to wait 6 months for like their request to get processed. And it just becomes this very like annoying heavy lift. But that is how the enterprises have been doing it for a long time. Small businesses.
Sorry, just to jump in real quick. I'm curious in terms of that process. Does that change? You mentioned the user experience, but how does that change from going from a heavy coded SharePoint kind of Microsoft SharePoint to no code? And is that a function of their business? Is that just the reality of technology at that time, being that you had to kind of build into an enterprise versus you offering almost a packaged solution? Is that an evolution of technology or business model? Or is it something that, now you're capable to do, or you choose to do it because you want kind of better experience for your customers?
Yeah, I think it's both, like basically both. So one is like you kind of had the technology platform of things like Angular or like basically single page web apps that essentially allow you to kind of create these experiences where they're not these like form kind of click through kind of experiences, where it's much more like, I don't know if you use something like Trello or Notion, where you're kind of like having this experience where like everything's in one page and it feels more like you're playing a video game. That's actually like a technology like paradigm shift in the release of certain programming languages and the support of like the browsers to be able to like support that. So that is, it's about 10 years old at this point, but way newer than like where SharePoint is. And then there's also like the business model shift, which is basically bottoms up or product led growth. And so basically the enterprise teams getting more comfortable, or you might call it like shadow software, where these teams are kind of like going, oh, I don't actually want to like use this product that's been purchased top down by the CIO and the IT department. I want to go like just adopt my own software for our team and just like put it on our credit card, right? And so that like bottoms up kind of way to sneak into enterprises has allowed us to kind of get into those businesses, and it's a common strategy at this point. But those were two shifts.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of founders are really taking that approach, seeing that having that user experience and that customer feedback on the ground level for those, and it kind of, rather than having this trickle down effect, which I think traditionally was a lot of ways companies were trying to get into organizations, versus like that shadow software approach, which is extremely exciting to see the capabilities from a business standpoint and to really get into these organizations. And obviously it relies on a seamless and easy kind of experience. And I'm curious, based on with all workflows and all these processes and all the technology that can be integrated, how do you keep such a simple experience, being that things can get extremely complicated and complex as you continue building into it?
It's hard. I think it's like in general, like basically what you just asked is essentially one of the hardest problems in product to solve, right? Is like, how do you build a complex product that has a simple user experience? This is like what Apple figured out, right? And I actually think that's like one of the other paradigm shifts that's happened to support this, is that people have gotten more used to using software that has a high quality user experience. Like in the first kind of generations of software, you would just take anything because anything was better than nothing than what you had before, right? So you would deal with it even if it's a poor user experience, even if you had to have your engineering team do stuff, because it was still better than what you had before. But once the iPhone came out, once Gmail came out, like once these products came out where like people just got used to using these better user experience software, they started to expect that at work as well as at home, right? And started to search for that like similar experience. And like, why is this so much worse than like what I have on my phone or whatever? But yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question or problem to solve, right? So a big part of it is, for us, has been basically building the product as a product led or self-serve product first, right? So that's the type of software that we want to use because we're small businesses and we're used to that, again, that kind of consumerized experience. And so by building the product in a way where anybody can sign up and then anybody can go and build their own workflow and it doesn't need code, they don't need to know how to code, that becomes like a core kind of pillar of the product that we then iterate around, right? Many of our competitors, for example, like when you go to the website and try to sign up, like you can't use the products. Like you get pushed into like a demo flow and you have to like speak to a sales rep, and then someone in their team will like customize the software, and then they'll show you what it looks like when somebody's customized it on the back end. And So they're basically not required to make that building experience like streamlined because they're kind of like using people to cover up that bad experience.
Right.
Whereas we've had the product open since day one, and we didn't, especially at the early days when we were mostly selling to SMBs, we didn't have like people even available like to go and build that stuff for you. You just, if you wanted to use, we had thousands of people coming in every week. Like we couldn't build that stuff for people. If you wanted to do it, you had to do it yourself. And so we just consistently took the feedback from the users of like, oh, I can't figure out how to do this. I can't find that. I can't click here. How does this work?
Yeah.
We just constantly just like polished it and polished it and polished it and polished it to the point where like people could figure it out on their own. Right.
Yeah.
And like even today, like we're still working on how do we continue to improve that experience. Like for example, now we're working on a bunch of like AI GPT features, and that's really actually really exciting for us. It's like a big, and I've got some San Francisco ambience back there. That's going to be a huge paradigm shift for us. Like for a number of companies, they're quite scared about AI, that it's going to basically eat their lunch. But for us, it's going to be a massive like blessing. And one of the biggest, hardest parts about like building out processes and workflows is the build process itself, right? If you've got a complicated process, it's complicated to build, no matter how easy the software is, right?
Right.
But like with AI, we can basically generate these really complicated processes in like one click, essentially. And that's really like lightening the lift for our users.
Yeah, I can imagine. Obviously, I want to tap into AI and kind of how that's impacted. But just, I guess, taking a step back, going a little bit more broad, I feel like the word process maybe needs a little bit more clarity from your end. It's like the word scaling. Like, what does that actually mean mechanically in terms of how you think about processes and how you think about processes at or other organizations' entirety? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. So I think that most people underestimate the power of process. Like they stick it in the back seat, and especially when they're a smaller business or a growing business, they say it becomes like a kind of secondary focus, but they really shouldn't, right? Processes are actually like what happens most of the time in a business. They run the world, right? Like that's the reason that you have stock supermarkets, on-time trains, safely landing planes. All of that is powered by processes, right? But a lot of people kind of buzz around projects, OKRs, and strategies. But like when it comes to executing the company's most important activities, people tend to get a bit bored and stop paying attention. But you know, the fact is that most work that happens in any successful team is process, not projects.
Yeah.
It's just like your day-to-day activities, like making the product or selling the product, right? Or delivering a service. Like that is the core of like what goes on in a business every day. And once companies get to scale and they really figure that out, think like Salesforce or Sony or SpaceX or whatever, they understand and see the value of well-maintained and iterative processes, right? But a lot of companies don't, or take a long time to figure that out. And they tend to just like continue to do these like do work once, throw it away, do work again, throw it away, do work again, throw it away. And that's a lot of like this kind of like project driven mentality where you're using spreadsheets or you're using documents or project management tools. But successful teams quickly figure out how to basically take a project that worked and transform that into a process and shift the focus to scaling and optimizing the things that are working and encoding that into the business, into the kind of core of the culture and the way that business runs. And when that shift happens, that's when like huge value gets created, right? That's when you can unlock scale. That's when you can unlock efficiency. That's where you can drive the business and drive growth. And so, yeah, that's what we're passionate about. And that's where we see like the most successful businesses where they get a lot of their leverage and scale from.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about when is the right time for companies to start bringing in a tool like Process Street and start building out these processes. Is it at the conception of an idea, and is it involved during the iterative process of understanding whether it's a product or a feature, or even just communicate with clients and kind of going down funnel with that? When do I incorporate Process Street into my team? Is it during the iterative process? Is it after the fact? Where do you see the most value for teams looking to bring on Process Street?
Yeah, so like it's when you hit a certain amount, like a certain level of scale. Right. So for like, say, a sales team or a finance team, an IT team, that might be like in the 3 to 5 people, like in that team itself. And or it could be like when you're hitting some type of scale, like say you're doing employee onboarding, maybe your HR team is not 5 people, but maybe you're onboarding 3, 4, 5 people a month. That's when it becomes like
Yeah.
a much more important to have that process. It's not as useful if you're a really, really small business or a really small team. It becomes a bit more like there's overhead to build and maintain processes, right? And
Yeah.
at some point, like you need that overhead to be worthwhile, right? Otherwise, you can just be kind of like burning time doing process work and ignoring customers or just like not figuring out how to grow the business. And I
Yeah.
would say just generally, kind of coming back to like general founder tips, like focus on the money first, focus on growth first, focus on sales first, get some type of repeatability there. Like get the business to a point where you can actually afford to build out a decent sized team, and then start thinking about how do you like systemize that team and make it efficient so that it's ready to continue growing.
Yeah, it's so fascinating thinking about even the word scale. It's really just automating enough of other process of the business so that people who are onboarding can use it. As a founder, you don't have to have such a hands-on interaction with every part of the function of a business, but it's repeatable, it's measurable, and it's a consistent experience from at least a client standpoint, a customer standpoint, to be
Hmm.
able to get to that point. But talking a little bit more about Process Street, tell us a little bit more about the traction. What have you seen? What's been exciting about the growth up to this moment? And being that you're starting to incorporate AI and all these new technologies, what are you particularly excited about in terms of the next milestones of Process Street?
Yeah, totally. So at this point, we have thousands of customers all around the world, 150 countries. We started the product as an SMB product. So really kind of like building it for ourselves, I guess. I was running a company that was 20, 30 people, and just it's just a lot easier to sell to smaller businesses. Like the big companies, they're very sensitive around their processes, right? Like that, a lot
Yeah,
of that is their secret sauce, their proprietary information. So they want to see a lot of security, they want to see a lot of stability. But over time, that like as I just mentioned, like you get more value out of processes as you're a bigger business, right? The ROI
right.
becomes higher and higher and higher. So there is more value to optimizing your processes the bigger you are as a business. And so that naturally was like where we kind of went as a product. And so now we have huge companies like Salesforce and Colliers and MIT and these huge enterprises with thousands of people that we run all sorts of crazy processes for.
Yeah,
A lot of onboarding, a lot of like document automation, financial reporting, approvals. The product's being built out from like a very simple process management tool or like workflow tool to a full process management platform. So we have the core workflow product. We have a pages product that's like a wiki. We have a database product that's like Airtable. We have a forms product that's like Typeform, and they all work together into this kind of like process management platform that lets you
yeah,
basically coordinate large, complex teams and processes, even cross multiple teams and multiple locations, get a lot of data, automate a lot of work. And we have like a Slack app and a Teams app. So you can just like do your approvals inside Slack or fill out your forms inside Microsoft Teams. And the platform's kind of built out mobile apps, all that type of stuff. So it's really kind of grown from this simple, really basic workflow tool into
yeah,
a fully powered process platform. And as you said
yeah.
now, or you mentioned, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna ask. You said you have forms like Typeform. Are you integrating those technologies into Process Street, or are you building similar types of technologies that then kind of are incorporated in the ecosystem?
No, so it's all part of the platform, right? So
Yeah,
you'd think about them as like different kind of modules inside the platform that you can use. And then they all work together, right? So you can have a workflow that then kind of embeds your page that's like your documentation or like your SOP, right? And then
yeah, yeah,
so as part of the workflow, it can be like, hey, you need to do this now. And it's like, oh, you don't know how to do that? Check out the SOP. Or it's like, you need to collect some data from a customer, like send them a form so that they can fill out the form and then have that data come back into the workflow and then take that data and store it in the database. Like,
yeah.
so they all work together basically as a tool that you can kind of pull and push from the different modules and use them to basically make that management of the process much more streamlined and all inside one place, all inside your Slack, all inside your team. So you don't have to be logging into different tools or like having different apps and how they work, right? You can just have Slack basically and it'll all work there, for example. Yeah.
And what's kind of the biggest challenge you see in terms of building? Is it being up to date with technologies that you're integrating into the tool? Is it being compliant with other of yours that say have more privacy, heavy restrictions, or financial tools or information? What's kind of the challenge of building a platform that touches so many different pieces of technology and parts of the business?
Yeah. Yeah. All of that and more. Like going up market, enterprises are very demanding. They have really complex things. They have very complex environments. They have really complex processes that can be 1,000 steps, right? Across like hundreds of people where there's just like all sorts of crazy shit going on. They're very sensitive about their data. They're very sensitive about their security. They're very sensitive about their stability. So having a really stable, scalable platform that's super secure, that's compliant, has all the security certifications, but then also just like can integrate with all the different things they need it to integrate with, can handle all the complex logic and routing and like controls that they might need. And then just kind of dealing with a platform as itself, like I just said, it's like lots of products, basically. Like all those could almost be their own products, right? So like there's just a lot of like functionality that can be built. And so prioritizing that and making sure that it all works well together and it's a good experience is it's all pretty hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I always like to kind of think about whether it's external or internal. From your point of view, what are some of the biggest risks that Process Street faces today?
I mean, at this point, like I'd probably say some of the big risks might be like something like Microsoft basically building a clone of our tool, right? Them doing like what they did to Slack, and they're kind of going around doing this to a number of other tools. So yeah, basically like some of the big companies that just have way larger budgets and own like a large chunk of the customers already, if they can kind of figure out how to build really nice experience products like ours, that could be a risk, but it can also be an opportunity for us as well to kind of partner with their competitors or whatever. So I think that like we were talking about before, like AI, for example, I don't think it's a risk. I think it's a huge blessing for us. And that's like what we're most excited about right now is building out a ton of different AI features, both on the generative side to help our users, customers build the workflows like really, really easily on demand. Like one click, you can build these really complex workflows with hundreds of fields and steps, and they can get really, really complex. But then also using AI in a lot of in the workflows themselves. So transforming data, merging data, integrating data, like doing complex formulas, doing complex logic on data. There's a lot of interesting stuff you can do.
Yeah, and maybe even I'm just spitballing, but maybe even just like setting up the framework. Do you see kind of a lot of that in terms of templatizing, using AI to really kind of, and machine learning to really understand how are customers building in Process Street, and how can I almost templatize that to really kind of accurately maybe set up and even for speed for certain industries or certain stakeholders.
So
how do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, so that's been our approach from the beginning, is like, how do you templatize it? And that has definitely helped kind of users adopt the product, and just like helped with their like understanding and imagination of what they can build. But AI basically takes that to a whole new level where you don't even need to templatize it. Like it will just generate it. So it essentially gives you infinite templates that can be extremely, extremely long tail, right? So you can be like, oh, I'm a hamburger restaurant in Tennessee. I need an onboarding workflow. And like, we probably wouldn't build an onboarding template for like specifically for a hamburger restaurant in Tennessee, right? But the AI can, right? It knows what the HR laws are in Tennessee. It knows like what the difference would be for a hamburger restaurant versus a Chinese restaurant, right? And like so it kind of like, it can give you essentially like an infinite template stack, which for us to build, to try to templatize those like manually, which is what we were doing in the past, right? We have hundreds of templates, right? And now with AI, we essentially have millions of templates. So, and trying to make that ourselves would have been like virtually impossible, but now it's literally, you can just do it in a click. Yeah.
Yeah. Does that change the onboarding kind of procedure? So say if I click into Process Street, I download it, I'm starting my free trial, I get all these notifications on how to build, what to build, where things are. But if I can see that if you kind of have an AI component, it almost could be just like a one one prompt, like, all right, what are you looking to build? What process are you looking into? And almost just like expediting that and kind of creating this collaborative. Do you get really excited about how you're able to not only just use templates and build out with AI, but even bring the user journey way more customized to what your customers are coming into? Is that kind of what amongst that is kind of on the next frontier?
Exactly what you just said. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
that is like what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can just kind of like take what you've given us and we can do like some lookups on your business. So we can see like, oh, you're an HR manager at Netflix. We can just almost automatically drop you into a screen that's like, we know you're an HR manager, we know you're at Netflix, we know you're in California, Los Gatos or whatever. Then then just like tell us like what you're trying to do here. Like, are you trying to do performance reviews or you're trying to do onboarding, right? And you just type in onboarding and and it will know about Netflix. It'll know about Netflix's culture already. And like it can build out like that workflow like in the first few seconds of you coming into the product. What else it can do that's really cool as well is it can take it to another level where it can basically intake any type of file, right? So if you already have something, if you've written down some bullet points, if you have got a document already, if you've got a spreadsheet already, if you've got a Visio diagram, a workflow diagram, even if you've drawn a workflow on a napkin and taken a photo of it, right? We can basically take that and then turn that into your workflow. So we can kind of like intake any type of like file essentially and merge that with what we know. We know that you're Netflix. We know that you're an HR manager. You've given us this napkin photo of like kind of what you'd want it to be like, right? And then we can turn all of that in like one click and like generate your workflow. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And I'm curious, how do you think, or for what reason did you not say go into a particular market segment, say HR workflow processes, and really kind of focus there and kind of scale that and maybe go upstream there? What made you kind of think about tackling entire workflows, and how's that been challenging, being that that's a little bit non-traditional in terms of how most startups, if you think about all the accelerator groups, the like YFC, Techstars, they always tell you pick one ICP, go after it tenaciously. And once you kind of reach scaling there, found product market fit, then kind of go and expand with fundraising and things like that. It's kind of like the traditional approach, but you're taking a really broad strokes into tapping into a lot of teams in a lot of different industry. Was that by design, or is that just because it's so robust and has a lot of capabilities?
Look, that's been a constant point of contention over the years. And I think the answer is like you could make it work either way.
Yeah.
There are a lot of examples in our space of big companies that do hundreds of millions in revenue that are horizontal, right? And the big advantage of that is that you just have a much larger market to play with, and that's the positive side. Especially like for us, I think another component was that because we were product led and self-serve, having that large horizontal market actually is quite important. You don't really see actually very many successful PLG products that are vertical, because like the market's so small that you kind of need to go more outbound and like acquire those customers in a more like traditional sales model. So it was part of us wanting to build like the first PLG like process management platform, right?
Yeah.
And over the years we've definitely had this debate a number of times. But I think the other thing too was also just us dog fooding it. Like we use Process Street across every team. We use it as the central storage for all the processes in the business. And the way that we found value was its ability to basically manage not just like the processes for a single use case or a single department, but also cross-functionally, right? Manage processes across different teams and departments. And that's actually where a lot of our use cases lie, where we handle these cross-functional workflows where you are trying to coordinate multiple teams to do stuff, and you want visibility across those different teams, and you want accountability and understand where the bottlenecks are. And so that's a lot of the value of the platform, but it also creates a lot of challenges, right? Like you said, not having clear ICPs, needing to sell to multiple stakeholders, needing to get authentication approval into multiple different apps that are owned by different teams. Those all create challenges. And I think that anybody who's selling horizontally like experiences those. Yeah.
If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for Process Street?
I think long-term I think we would eventually sell to a company, right? Like there's a lot of great software companies out there that we already integrate with that I think would be a great partner for. And there's a lot of crossover between our products. And so I think that there's going to be a nice
Yeah.
place for us to kind of partner up and continue to grow that way.
Yeah. I love this next section. I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions, Vinay, and we'll see where we go. First question, I always like to open it up is, what's particularly hard about your job?
Probably like the context switching. So
Sure.
I'm managing all the different departments essentially. 1 hour I'm head of product, 1 hour I'm head of HR, 1 hour I'm head of marketing, 1 hour I'm head of sales. And so I'm constantly just getting like, hey, can you help me with this deal? Hey, can you help me with this like personnel problem? Hey, we've got this new like product that we're working on. Like, can you give me feedback on it? And so it's just constantly having to switch between all those different
Yeah.
like functions is quite challenging, and it's a
Yeah.
lot to stay on top of. Yeah.
Yeah. But thinking about no code and this huge revolution, even on the development side, not even just with these tools, but what are your what's kind of hopeful about the transition to no code, and what does it allow in terms of the outcomes that I should expect as a consumer or as a business bringing on something no code? Is it the velocity? Is it the ease of implementation? Is it the saving of not hiring specialists to be able to use the software to build into my company and my organization? What have you seen that's really exciting about the no code revolution? And is it a fad, or is it something that it's going to be more commonplace moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, what I'd even say is that basically AI or generative AI is almost like the next phase of no code, right? And
Sure.
basically what you're seeing is you're basically seeing like programming power being given to non-programmers, right?
Yeah.
And so like if you think that, everybody in the world, not everybody, but anybody with an internet connection or a phone or whatever, or a computer is using software, right? Yet only 1% of the world, or something less than 1% of the world, knows how to code.
Yeah.
And so no code and AI basically, or generative AI specifically, is just like putting more and more power in that other 99% and like
Yeah.
opening up the kind of like ability for the rest of the world to transform the devices that they're using, right? To actually like have an impact on those devices and not just be users, but be builders, right? And actually be
Yeah.
able to contribute to that environment and shape the experience of the devices that they're actually using all day, every day, right? And so I don't think that's going anywhere. I think it's just now it's going to go from 1% to 5% of people to 10%
Yeah.
of people to 50% of people, right? Where like more and more you're going to be able to have control over that environment, over that like virtual space that you're in. And that it increases velocity, right? It allows a lot more personalization, and it takes away the bottlenecks of like needing those engineers to do stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's so fascinating thinking about the capabilities and what it allows founders to do, even early on founders who are
Totally.
wanting to start a product and being able to do so with less investment, less friction, and you get consumer feedback at least in such a rapid rate. And then you could build such a sophisticated organization.
Right. But founders, I'd still put most of them in that 1%, right? Like
Right,
even if they're
right.
not even if they're not engineers, they're still like very advanced like users.
Yeah.
But you're gonna see this go so that like your grandmother, right, will be able to like customize like her
Right.
experience. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's not just gonna be the HR assistant that's gonna be able to customize their experience, right? Like it's gonna be way deeper than just founders, right?
Yeah.
Founders are gonna be the early adopters and the superpower users, but it's gonna go really deep. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like to ask this question because I love how founders extract knowledge from anything they ingest, whether it's early in your career or now. What books or people have influenced you the most?
I mean, it's been a journey over the years. I think some of the early books that I read, like when I was a teenager, for example, like Rich Dad Poor Dad, was pretty influential. Just trying to understand money. I think that the 4 Hour Work Week was influential when thinking about how to just like knowing nothing about starting a business to just like getting something going. And I actually think that's the hardest like part of the journey, is kind of switching from like employee mode to founder mode, because once you're in founder mode, now you're in like knowledge consumption mode, you're in experimentation mode. And like that allows you to basically identify and test and execute on opportunities, but you can't start that. You don't really start that process until you unlock the time and the headspace to do that. So I think that would be my advice, I guess, to founders as well, is like start earlier, right? Like even if your idea is stupid, like doesn't matter, right? Because like it's
Right.
more about shifting your mindset from like this, I'm an employee, I'm waiting for this like super idea or this moment to like, I'm a founder. The buck stops at me. I take complete responsibility for everything. I'm now an experimentation and like a learning machine, right? And like, that's all I do. And whether it's going to be the first thing or the second thing, like, or the 10th thing, right? Like starting earlier is important. But like more recently, I'd say like some of the most important books have been around mindfulness and consciousness.
Yeah.
So
how
like,
those been helpful?
Yeah. So like the management framework that I use is something called conscious leadership, which basically applies mindfulness or consciousness to running a business or managing a team or managing work relationships. And so there's a really good book called Conscious Leadership, the 15 Tenets of Conscious Leadership, something like that. So that's a really good one. And then there's some other books that I like in this space one's called The Untethered Soul, another one's called Waking Up. And so those have just been really, really powerful around one, just management and like the relationships that I have with my team. And then also just how like I'm intentional with my mind and my decisions and my priorities, and kind of like, and just like keeping my own like stress and sanity like under check.
Yeah. I know we're coming to the end of the episode here, so I want to make sure we get a chance to make sure we didn't leave anything on the table. So I'll let you get that. Yeah. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna restart. We'll do some clipping, so don't worry. Yeah, we're coming to that. Yeah, we're coming to the end of the episode, and I want to make sure we didn't leave anything on the table here. So, if there any question I didn't ask you that I should have, or anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to bring up, any last second things that we left on the table here?
No, just if you're interested in optimizing or scaling your processes, just if you're interested in figuring out how to scale and optimize your processes, then just recommend checking out the product.
Yeah, and we always like to add this a little bit at the end. Where can we find you? Where can we find your product? Where can we support? Give us your LinkedIn, your websites. Where can we get part of you as a founder, Vinay, and also with Process Street? And if you want to start playing with the product, where can we go find it?
Yeah, definitely. So everything about the product, process.st, can find us, or just Google Process Street. And then you can find me on Twitter at VinayP10.
Amazing, Vinay. It's so exciting not only learn about your background, your experience, but honestly how you started building Process Street, kind of how you think about building a product. And I don't want to say non-traditional way, but one that kind of really taps into a lot of different users, a lot of different use cases. And what's really exciting is the bit about AI and how that's going to really expedite not only the onboarding, but the user experience, and also the ability that Process Street has to create these really intensive, sophisticated workflows and organizations here in broadly. So I'm so excited to share this to the audience. I hope you enjoyed yourself, Vinay. Thank you so much for joining us on Behind Company Lines today.
Awesome. Great to be here. Thanks, Julian. Appreciate it.